Welcome, everybody. I'm the 100 Proof News Hound, and we're here with another episode of the 100 Years and More Show. Today, we're going to go back into the 19th century, and we're going to look at three of the most famous and consequential people of that century. Specifically, we're going to look at Robert E. Lee, William Tecumseh Sherman, and Ulysses S. Grant. But we're going to look at them before they were world famous, before they were generals. We're going to see if we can tell through the newspapers of the day what was building their character and what kind of character they had and what an impact that would have on the future of the nation. Now let's call them the aristocrat, the academic, and the everyman. With Robert E. Lee obviously being the aristocrat, William Tecumseh Sherman being the academic, and of course Ulysses S. Grant being the everyman. We've done a little bit of original research in this episode, and we're going to show you how the United States basically dodged a bullet when Robert E. Lee rejected their offer in 1861 to command the Union forces. Anyways, let's jump into the story. Oh, but first, please like and subscribe. It's important for the development of the channel. Hit that button now, and we'll jump into the show. Now, Robert E. Lee, our aristocrat, was born in Stratford Hall Plantation. Now, doesn't that sound aristocratic? And he's the son of Light Horse Harry, the famous Revolutionary War cavalry officer. It doesn't get much more aristocratic than that in the South in 1830. Now, in 1831, well, if you're going to say that Robert E. Lee was born on third base, he's halfway home when he marries in 1831 Mary Ann Custis. Well, who's Mary Ann Custis? Well, she's the granddaughter of Martha Washington. Yes, that Martha Washington. And where do they set up home? Well, in Arlington Plantation, Arlington House. Now, where's that? Well, you've seen it. It's in Arlington National Cemetery across from Washington. That's their house up on the hill. That's Robert E. Lee's matrimonial home. That, ladies and gentlemen, in 19th century America is an aristocrat. Now, a man's got to do something with his life. But since he doesn't need to earn a living because he's got like land and slaves and stuff, he goes into the military. He enrolls at West Point, and not only does he just enroll at West Point, he becomes somewhat of a legend at West Point. He gets into not a fist fight, but an academic battle with one Charles Mason. Now, who's Charles Mason? Well, he's the guy that happens to come in first in the class every year that Robert E. Lee's at West Point. Robert E. Lee coming in second. We have here the Daily National Journal of Washington, D.C. of July 16th, 1827. And it notes here under third class, which is actually like freshman, that Robert E. Lee is second to Charles Mason. And you'll note again in the Wednesday, July 22nd, 1829 article of the Wheeling Compiler that once again, now in first class, that would be third year, that Charles Mason has once again edged out Robert E. Lee. And how tight was this? And well, let's have a look here. It said Mason and Lee were tied for the head of the class in artillery tactics and conduct, but Mason bested Lee in all other subjects and graduated with an overall score, get this, 1,995.5 points out of 2,000, compared to Lee's 1,966.5 points. Those 2-point totals remain the highest point totals ever achieved by two students in the history of West Point to the present day. Now, Mason, just because you go to West Point doesn't mean you're going to become a famous general. Mason actually was only in the Army for 2 years. Then he went on to become the president of the Burlington and Missouri River Railroad. He was the United States Commissioner of Patents several times, and he did a lot of non-military stuff, but at the highest level. Robert E. Lee, of course, though, dives into his military career. And we have here an article from the Daily National Intelligencer of August 11th, 1829, with announcing Lee's first appointment. It says here, Cadet Robert E. Lee will be breveted second lieutenant 1st of July, 1829. So he's coming out as a second Louis. You're going to hear the term brevet a lot during this presentation. Brevet really just means that it's a promotion in the field, usually for meritorious service or bravery. It's not the same as, oftentimes you'll see that a person might have a army rank of captain, but they've been breveted up to colonel because, well, necessity requires it. So he starts off as a second lieutenant, becomes a first lieutenant according to the Madisonian of Washington, D.C., July 21, 1838. It says first Lieutenant Robert E. Lee, is to be captain July 7, 1838. He's moving faster than I can take account of. So he's already a captain by 1838. And he has been put in charge, he's in the Army Corps of Engineers, the true bright and the best in the 19th century, graduates of West Point, the top of the class go into the Army Corps of Engineers. The rest go into artillery, cavalry, and infantry. So he's in the Army Corps of Engineers, and he gets an appointment on March 30th, 1839. According to the Public Ledger, it says here, Robert E. Lee superintending improvements of St. Louis Harbor and rapids of the Mississippi around St. Louis. So he's been put in charge of the works to improve navigation on the Mississippi around St. Louis. The Army Corps of Engineers, people don't realize how important they have been, but if you go down the list of important engineering feats in the last 200 years in the United States, you'll find that the Army Corps of Engineers is behind most of them. Then in the Daily Madison of Washington, D.C. of May 25th, 1844, announces, in order to obtain the usual information with respect to the discipline, course of studies, and general condition of the military academy, a board will assemble at West Point for the inspection of that institution on the 10th day of June and will be composed of follows. Major General Winfield Scott, biggest hero pre-1850 in the American military, and along with the other 9 guys there, one of them is Captain Robert E. Lee, Corps of Engineers. So he's being appointed already at this age to important boards and commissions. You're going to see with Grant and Sherman, they don't get appointed to anything, but they're struggling along. But Robert E. Lee's the golden boy, and he's forging his own path through the military, and everyone is accommodating him. He's subject. The Mexican War comes on in 1847, the Mexican-American War. And he's the subject of a puff piece here in the Richmond Enquirer, November 23rd, 1847. It says here, Captain Robert E. Lee of the Engineers, another Virginian, is also frequently and highly complimented. He is a son of the celebrated Henry Lee and commander of the Legion in the Revolutionary War, and a brother of Charles Cartier Lee, Esquire, late of Harley County, now of this county. It says here, Captain Lee, now this is pretty puffery, deserves all the praise that can be said of him. Indeed, his merits are so prominently and so cordially set forth by all the generals in Mexico that we deem it unnecessary to call special attention to his distinguished service in the brilliant campaign. But of course, they just brought special attention to it. So you're going to see this. He's made the subject of numerous puff pieces. We've only included a few in here today. He's asked for his opinion with the state of military affairs by the Daily National Intelligencer of Washington, D.C. on December 19, 1847. It says here, for the following statement of the defenses which our army found before the city, the statement was prepared by Robert E. Lee of the Corps of Engineers. He said that the defenses has not before been made public, and it will aid in showing how many and how serious obstacles our gallant army had to struggle against. So he's been asked his opinion about the defenses around Mexico City, and he provides all the technical data, and then he concludes with, on all the lines defending the approaches to the city, 92 batteries prepared for 346 guns and 42 infantry breastworks were there. So there were formal defenses that, fortunately, at the direction of Robert E. Lee and a few other generals, the United States Army was able to easily overcome. And because of his heroism there, the New York Daily Herald announces on September 3rd, 1848, that Brevet Major Robert E. Lee, Captain of Engineers, he's been promoted from a captain to a brevet major. Remember, though, in the 19th century, in the American military, it was not frowned upon to have side jobs. If you could run a business on the side or earn money, it was allowed. And oftentimes, people use their military careers for, just as a stepping stone into private industry or into politics, but not Robert E. Lee. It's noted here in the Baltimore Sun, Baltimore, Maryland, October 14th, 1848. The railroad presidency, the Cumberland civilian, in announcing the election of Thomas Swan, Esquire, to the presidency of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad, state, we understand that the post was offered to Lieutenant Colonel Robert E. Lee, the celebrated engineer of Scott's division of the U.S. Army, and that it was by him declined. So he was offered the presidency of the Baltimore and Ohio Railroad and turned it down. Because again, he doesn't need the money. He wants, if not the fame, he wants the acclaim associated with being an important army officer. And to that end, he is appointed according to the Alexandria Gazette on September 22, 1852, he's appointed by the Secretary of War, superintendent of the Military Academy at West Point. Running West Point, that's got to be the most anal job in the Army, but it's a perfect job for someone with the talents and academic credentials of Robert E. Lee. So off he goes to West Point. This article, there's a death in the family, and this is going to come back in. The death a couple of deaths are going to come back and haunt, literally, Robert E. Lee. This is one of them. But this gives you an idea of just how tight he is in the American aristocracy. Nashville Union and American, May 5th, 1853. Obituary. Mrs. Mary L. Randolph Custis, wife of George Washington Parker Custis, died at the family residence at Arlington on the Potomac River in sight of the national capital. So it's good to be buried if you die right in the middle of a national cemetery, but of course it wasn't the cemetery then. Mrs. Custis was descended from the widely known Randolph family. So even families we don't know now were widely known then. She died at the advanced age of 70, which is not too far in my future, so I hope I'm not that advanced, leaving only one child, Mrs. Lee. And who's Mrs. Lee? Well, wife of Colonel Robert E. Lee of the Army and son of General Henry Lee of the Revolutionary memory. It says the husband of the deceased is the grandson of Mrs. Washington and was thus intimately acquainted with the father of his country. Can't be tighter than that in Virginia. Another puff piece, got to put them in because there's so many. Alexandria Gazette, March 7th, 1855. It's noted, no officer came out of the Mexican War with a more enviable reputation. He was present at nearly every battle and always distinguished. His praises were on every tongue. In a single campaign, he rose from the grade of captain to that of colonel by brevet, having been thrice, 3, promoted for his gallantry. For the past 2 years, Colonel Lee has discharged the responsibility, blah, 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 West Point. But he's the soldier, the man of the hour. But then we've got some really troubling articles. And this is when I say was original research. No, this is just, we're going to be quoting here in the next few articles, are from the New York Times and the New York Tribune, which are probably the two largest newspapers in America at the time. And this has to do with Robert E. Lee's relationships with slavery. Now, no one ever said that he was an abolitionist, but in the hundreds of articles and books that I have read on the subject, the position of Robert E. Lee with respect to slavery has been, well, it's been opaque at best. And I don't know why these articles that we're about to go through here have been ignored by academics, but they must have been because they're just not there. And this is stuff that one should know. So here we go. The headline, some facts that should come to light. It says here, this is the New York Tribune, Friday, June 24th, 1859. It is known that the venerable George Washington Parker Custis died some 2 years ago, and the same papers that announced his death announced also the fact that on his deathbed he liberated his slaves. So this is what's going to happen. Robert E. Lee is going to be made the executor of this estate, and he's in charge of disgorging what the proceeds according to the will. And one of the proceeds was apparently that the slaves would be released. Now they're going to get into a pee and match that they weren't to be released immediately, but not till after 5 years. But the executor has the option of doing whatever he wants with the assets, and he's keeping them slave bound for the full 5 years. It says here, finally they were told 5 years must elapse before they could go. Meantime, they have been deprived of all means of making a little now and then for themselves, as they were allowed to do under Mrs. Custis. So they're saying that Robert E. Lee's not letting them work on the side and earn a few bucks so that they could augment their meager rations here. And meager they were. And it says here, they have been kept under harder at work than ever, and part of the time have been cut down to half a pack of unsifted meal a week for each person without even the fish allowances. So they're basically on bread and water. It says 3 old women who have nearly seen a century each are kept sewing, making clothes for the field hands from daylight until dark with nothing but the half pack of meal to eat. No tea or coffee, nothing that old people crave, and no time has been given them to earn these little rarities as formerly. So they can't do any work on the side. They just got to work for the man harder than ever, and he's not releasing the slaves. Then we have an article. It's a letter from an unnamed person. Maybe that's why the academics discount it. But what's in that letter is so heinous that, well, let's just have a look at it. It says, some 3 or 4 weeks ago, 3 more courageous than the rest, thinking their 5 years would never come to an end, came to the conclusion to leave for the north. It says here, they had not proceeded far before their progress was intercepted by some brute in human form who suspected them to be fugitives and probably with a reward. It says here, Mr. Lee was forthwith acquainted with their whereabouts, so Lee was informed. They admitted who they were, and Lee came down to get them. And when they were transported back, taken into a barn, stripped, and this is where we get into, this is the man we want running the Union Army, stripped, and then received 39 lashes each from the hands of the slave whipper. So there's an actual guy called the slave whipper. When he refused to whip the girl, Mr. Lee himself administered the 39 lashes to her. So it was too onerous, too terrible for the slave whipper to whip him, but Robert E. Lee stepped in and he whipped him. It says they were now sent to Richmond jail where they are now lodged. So that goes out there in the New York Tribune. Then a second, that's on June 24th, 1859. Then a second letter arrives, and it says basically the same thing, but it goes, the officer whipped the two men and said he would not whip the women, and Colonel Lee stripped her and whipped her himself. These are the facts I learned from the near relatives of the men whipped. After being whipped, he sent them to Richmond and hired them out as good farmhands. So those are the accusations. He's defended in a letter to the New York Tribune on June 28th, 1859. It says here, I'm so well acquainted with Colonel Lee and his estimable family and of the condition of matters at Arlington in relation to slaves that without hesitation I pronounce that the whole story is a malicious fabrication by some personal enmity of Colonel Lee. So we're supposed to rely on this fellow, just this fellow asserting the good character of Robert Lee, that he couldn't have done it, couldn't possibly have done it. And he says here, I am no advocate for slavery in any form. He's an apologist for slavery at worst, but he's no advocate of slavery, but Robert E. Lee didn't do it. Those two articles have consequences, which we shall discuss in a second. Article in the Staunton Spectator, April 23rd, 1861. It says here, it is probable that the secession of Virginia will cause an immediate resignation of many officers in the Army. And of course, Robert E. Lee would be one of the ones who may, if his predilections rely more to the state of Virginia than the United States. It says here, but if he should resign his present position in the U.S. Army, we call the immediate attention of our state to him as an able, brave, experienced officer. No man is superior in all that constitutes the soldier and the gentleman. No man more worthy to head our forces and lead our army. So this is the state of Virginia pleading, if he is going to resign, come and serve at the head of the Virginia troops. It says his reputation, his acknowledged ability, his chivalric character, his probity, honor, and may we add his eternal praise, his charisma, life, and conduct make his very name a tower of strength. It is a name surrounded by revolutionary and patriotic associations and reminiscences, but it's also surrounded by abuse of slaves. And notice how they said in the previous article, it didn't, the fellow who wrote in the complimentary article, he wasn't saying that slaves shouldn't be whipped. He was just saying that they should only be whipped by the whipmaster. He's just saying that Robert E. Lee wouldn't have whipped them. So he can order the whipping, that's okay, but to physically do it himself somehow violates some crazed code of conduct in aristocratic Virginia. But it does show you that there were limits on what, there were limits not on what could be done by slaves, but what could be done to slaves at the hand of the master. So Robert E. Lee does resign his commission. Charleston Mercury, Charleston, South Carolina, April 22, 1861. Robert E. Lee, one of the best officers of the United States Army and a commander of such and such, have resigned their commissions in the United States Army. Colonel Lee is to be commander-in-chief of the Virginia forces. His headquarters will be at Richmond. So there it is. He's resigned. He's now heading the army at Richmond. And we've got a situation here. Had Lee, think of the ramifications, had Lee accepted Lincoln's offer to command the Union troops, what would that position be? With that kind of record of slave holding and slave abuse, how would that have played out after 1865 in Reconstruction, when that was your point man? Your point man is an absolute pro-slavery advocate who's been accused of the most heinous crimes. In the United States, they may have won a few more battles. I don't know whether they would have won the war any sooner, but they certainly would have put themselves behind the eight ball with respect to reconstructing America had they chosen the aristocrat Robert E. Lee to lead their forces. Which brings us to our second man, the academic, William Tecumseh Sherman. Now, Sherman's born in 1820 in Ohio. He's a product of the New West. His father's a lawyer and a judge, but he dies when Sherman's but 9 years old, and he goes to live with his uncle, Thomas Ewing. And that's a heck of a family. Thomas Ewing would be a U.S. Senator from Ohio, and he's the first Secretary of the Interior, but that's nothing. Well, between the two of them, first off, you got Sherman's natural brothers, Charles, who becomes a federal judge, John, who founded the Republican Party, was a congressman, senator, cabinet secretary, and is most known for the Sherman Antitrust Act. And then he's got his brother Hoyt, who's only a banker. Now the Ewing family he goes to live with has three sons. The two stepbrothers served as generals in the Union Army, with one of them going on to become an ambassador. And then Thomas Ewing Jr. became a defense attorney. And who did he defend? Well, among other people, he defended the accused in the Lincoln assassination case. So this is a family of substance, but it's a family of substance all done through their own hard labor and work. There aren't no slaves out in the back working for the Sherman and Ewing families. Because of his political connections, because his basically all of his relatives are running the government, Sherman decides he'd like to go into the army too, and he enrolls at West Point, but he's not the academic sensation that Robert E. Lee is. It says here, this is Sherman's own words from his memoirs. And his memoir, do buy it. Get a copy of it. It's a 2-volume. Get one of the original first editions. They're not that expensive. Sherman's biography is a hoot. It's a well-written thing. Reminds you one very much of Churchill's biography. It's half accurate storytelling and half self-promotion, in contrast with Grant's autobiography, which is a superior autobiography, but it's a little drier, but Grant's a great writer. But anyways, here we are. Sherman says, at the academy, I was not considered a good soldier, for at no time was I selected for any office, but remained a private throughout the whole 4 years. Then as now, neatness in dress and form, with a strict conformity to the rules, were the qualifications required for offices, and I suppose I was found not to exceed in any of those. The exact opposite of Robert E. Lee, who excelled at all of that kind of prim and properness. Now, Sherman graduates 6th in his class, which is still pretty darn good. He goes into the artillery. He's not sufficiently high to go into the engineers. He goes into the artillery, and on the Public Ledger, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, July 29, 1840, notes that he's been made a 2nd lieutenant as of the 1st of July, 1840, in the 3rd Regiment of Artillery. He gets his first promotion on December 6, 1841, according to the Washington Union newspaper. Says 2nd Lieutenant William Tecumseh Sherman to be 1st Lieutenant, 30th November, 1841. He gets married in 1850, and he marries... He doesn't marry the aristocracy, but what he does is he marries his stepsister, which isn't as weird as it seems at the time. It happened a lot in the 19th century. It says, in the city on the evening of the 1st of May, by Reverend James Ryder, president of Georgetown College. See, he's got real guys there. He's got the president of Georgetown officiating. William Tecumseh Sherman and Ellen Boyle Ewing, oldest daughter of the Honorable Thomas Ewing, will be married. So he gets married, but to his prestigious stepsister. In the meantime, though, he's had a heck of an adventure. In 1846, now the war is coming with Mexico. But if you recall, the Mexican War just wasn't fought in Mexico. It led to the annexation of the entire American Southwest all the way to California. And he's sent to California. How do you get to California in 1846? Well, he spent 198 days on a ship, on a clipper ship, going around the Horn, all the way around South America, and up to California, where he arrives at a little town called Yerba Buena. 3 days after he gets there, Yerba Buena changes its name to San Francisco. He was in San Francisco before it was San Francisco. And not only that, he gets the assignment in 1848 to go out to Sutter's Mill to see if the report of gold in the creek there are true or not. He goes out there and he writes the report. The report that then becomes part of the press release that announces the gold rush in California. He's the man who wrote the article. He wrote the report. Now, remember I told you could earn money on the side or get into business if you were an officer in the 1800s? Well, he realizes that the gold rush is coming in, that most of the guys who are going to go out there panning for gold aren't going to make any money, but the guys who are going to make money are the people selling them, are people selling the equipment. And him and his friend open up a little hardware store where they're selling picks and shovels for 10 times their real price. And he makes $1,500, or the equivalent of about $45,000 in that 1 year running his shop. Now, he gets a promotion, and this promotion, it's not with the rank he's given, it's what area of the military it is for. Here we go. The Daily Republic, Washington, D.C., October 3rd, 1850, announces First Lieutenant William T. Sherman of the 3rd Artillery to become the Commissary of Subsistence with the rank of captain September 27th, 1950. And he's going to go to St. Louis to do that. But he's the Commissary of Subsistence. You know what that is? That's the Quartermaster Corps. That's logistics. That's how much stuff. That's stuff, buying and selling stuff for the military. As Omar Bradley said, amateurs talk tactics, professionals talk logistics. And what this gives, what becoming the Commissary of Subsistence gives It gives William Tecumseh Sherman intimate knowledge of how much goods, how much food, how much ammunition, how much of everything that you need to, say, move 100,000 men 100 miles. It's the logistics that make winning wars possible. And you're going to see that Sherman is a man of logistics, and you're going to see that Grant is a man of logistics. Modern men with modern abilities. It's noted here in 1853 in the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette that Captain William Tecumseh Sherman of the Subsistence Department, interesting name for it, has resigned. This vacancy will be filled by somebody else. He resigned to become a banker. He's run into some guys out west, and they're going to start something called the Lucas, Turner and Company Bankers Banking Company, and he's going to be a director. In the Lancaster Gazette, Thursday, May 26, 1853, it's noted that William Tecumseh Sherman on the 16th last published in San Francisco an announcement of the arrival of their friend and valued townsman in place of the following article. Convoluted way of saying that Sherman has returned, and we are informed that he's going to become a member of the Lucas Turner and Company banking house. And what do? The Lucas Company, they specialize in gold, dust, bullion, and certificates of deposits at the highest possible market rates. So he's become a banker. I guess it didn't take much to open up a bank back then. It's not like it's the Chase Manhattan, but there's basically half a dozen guys pooled their resources and they're going to run a bank. While he's back out on the West Coast where the bank is, there's a bit of an insurrection. There's a vigilance committee that's interfering with the conduct of the courts. And in order to put down this vigilant uprising, the mayor appoints. He goes, I hereby order and direct that all the volunteer companies within the county of San Francisco, also all persons subject to military duty within the county, report themselves for duty immediately to Major General William T. Sherman of the militia. So they've organized the militia, and they've made William Tecumseh Sherman a general, and he puts down the uprising because things like vigilance committees they tend to fold really quick in front of or any kind of government-sponsored organized violence, and that's what William Tecumseh Sherman's pretty good at, is organized violence. And so he gets the city back in good order very quickly. But then in 1857, there's a run in the bank. There's a financial crisis. There's a bank panic across America, and his bank goes bankrupt. He's forced to return from out east back to out west to put the affairs of the bank in order. He manages to pay off all the debt, but it leaves all the partners broke. All right, the bank has now become a break-even proposition, and it has broke William Tecumseh Sherman. Now, on the way back, and this time he decides to go by land. On the way back, he goes by land. He stops off in Kansas to visit an old friend who's in the legal field, and the friend says, "Hey, why don't you try to become a lawyer?" So he spends 2 years, 1859 and 1860, trying to practice law in Kansas, and he hates it. He hates being behind a desk. He hates dealing with the minutiae of wills and estates. He can't stand it. But fortunately for him, he receives a telegram from the state of Louisiana, of which he has no connection whatsoever. But he gets a telegram, and it's basically they want him to organize a military school. Well, it says here, the board is determined to graft on the seminary the principle of military discipline after the manner and plan of the Virginia Military Institute. So they want something like VMI in Baton Rouge for Louisiana residents. And they say the tuition is going to be $375, that'll cover everything. So it's about 10 grand, get you in. They're going to have 16 people, indigents, the poor they're going to educate, and they're going to teach them they're going to teach them just like West Point and VMI. There's going to be five professors, and Sherman's going to teach architecture, drawing, and be the commandant, run the show. And he does, in fact, build the whole damn thing. And you know what that university is today? It's LSU. It's Louisiana State University. If the war, as crazy as this sounds, if the war had not come, there would be statues of William Tecumseh Sherman in Louisiana saying that he was the founder of their state university. But the war did come. And here we have the Weekly Chicago Times, March 14th, 1861. It says here, we have already noted the fact that William Tecumseh Sherman, brother of Honorable John Sherman of Ohio, had resigned the office of superintendent of the military school for the state of Louisiana on account of the secession of that state from the Union. It says here, General Sherman's conversation showed him to be not a mere northerner or sectional partisan, but a Union man. You got to keep that in mind with any conversation dealing with the American Civil War, is that the cause may have been slavery. The thing that brought slavery, that brought the war about, was primarily slavery, but why people enlisted and why they fought was to preserve the Union, and preserve the Union at all costs. Now, I have an article here of the National Republican, Washington, D.C., June 20th, 1861. It's got Colonel William Tecumseh Sherman being appointed to lead the 13th Regiment of Infantry. And Sherman took that as kind of an insult. He felt that a fellow who had been a captain in the regular army should at least have been a brigadier general, and he thought about turning down that offer. But anyways, all was corrected in the Daily Missouri Republican of Wednesday, August 7th, 1861. It says here, Colonel William T. Sherman of Ohio was appointed and confirmed as a brigadier general of the regular army. So he becomes a brigadier general. He fights at the first battle of Bull Run, and then fate would have it, he's given a major promotion. It says the ill health of General Robert Anderson has at length compelled his retirement from the command in Kentucky, and his successor is General William T. Sherman, upon whom active duties of the campaign have already devolved. So he's now in charge of the entire West, basically the entire Western theater. And remember, he's a logistics man. He knows how much food, how much ammunition it takes to move given men, given miles. He knows what it'll take given the length of his front, how many men he's going to need. And he comes to the conclusion that in order to properly defend and then go on the offensive in the Western theater, he's going to need 200,000 men. And everyone thinks he's nuts. Here's the Daily Ohioan, Daily Ohio Statesman, December 12th, 1861. General William T. Sherman, insane. That's the headline. The painful intelligence reaches us in such form that we are not at liberty to discredit it that General W. T. Sherman, late commander of the Department of the Cumberland, is insane. It says we learned that he had one time telegraphed the War Department 3 times in one day for permission to evacuate Kentucky and retreat into Indiana. He also, on several occasions, frightened the leading Union men of Louisville almost out of their wits by the most astounding representations of the overwhelming force of Buckner and the assertion that Louisville could not be defended, and he was right. Sherman was right on almost all the assertions. He's a bit high-strung, so he may have been a little over the top in his presentation, but ultimately they would need exactly that many men in order to take control of the Western theater. But he's told to sit down for a while, and he goes on a few week sabbatical. But in about a month, he would meet the man that would change his life forever. And that's our third man, the everyman, Ulysses S. Grant. Grant's born in Ohio in 1822. Grant's father's a fervent abolitionist. He's the farthest thing from Robert E. Lee that you can find in a free white man in America in the 1840s. He's always noted as being a skilled rider, and he thinks I'd make a good cavalry officer. And so he goes in and he talks to his local congressman, and he gets a recommendation for West Point. And darn if he doesn't get in. Here we have the Philadelphia Inquirer, Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, July 15th, 1839. Military Academy at West Point. It says here, we find in the Army and Navy Chronicle the following list of names of cadets who were admitted into the U.S. Military Academy at West Point in June of 1839. And way down in Ohio, after Ohio, between a fellow named Hazlitt and William Reynolds, we have Ulysses S. Grant, and off he goes to West Point. Now, he doesn't distinguish himself in any regard at West Point and graduates middle of the pack. But he's sent off to Mexico in 1846. He's quartermaster. He's the same. He's doing the same job in Mexico that Sherman was doing in St. Louis and San Francisco. He's learning what militaries take to survive. Doesn't mean he doesn't want action, and he volunteers, even though he didn't have to. He could be 10 miles behind the front line. He volunteers for active combat. And in one battle, he disassembles a cannon, and him along with 3 other guys take it to the top of the steeple in the church at Chapultepec, Mexico, and they set up a battery on the top of the church and use that as a position to strafe the Mexican lines. And for that bravery, we have the article of the Daily National Whig, March 27, 1849. It says, for gallantry and meretricious conduct in the Battle of Chapultepec, Mexico, to date from the September 13, 1847, so it's a back date, colonels by brevet fellow, and for Ulysses S. Grant, he's risen in rank from a second lieutenant to a first lieutenant. But no one will ever say that Ulysses S. Grant was not a personally brave human being, for he was. He never shied away from combat. Now, when he gets back in the early 1850s, he stays in the Army. In 1853, he's given another promotion. New York Times, Wednesday, October 19th, 1853. Says here, in the 4th Regiment of Infantry, First Lieutenant Ulysses S. Grant is made captain as of August 5th, 1853. So he becomes a captain, which back then is a pretty big deal. The military is very small. To become a captain, you've put in your time. The problem is he gets sent out to Fort Humboldt out in Northern California, and he's there almost by himself, in the middle of nowhere, dealing basically with fur traders and Native Americans, and he begins to drink fairly heavily. He's caught drunk a couple times, by his the commanding officer, the colonel, and he tells the colonel that he will either quit drinking or resign. He tries his best. Can't quit drinking, so he resigns. And it's noted then in the Daily National Intelligencer, Washington Express of August 11th, 1854, that Captain Ulysses S. Grant of the 4th Infantry resigned on July 31, 1854. Along with him, resigning at the same time, but for entirely different reasons, was Captain Henry Halleck. Captain Halleck, he resigned because he was also a lawyer and businessman, and at the time of his resignation, he owned 30,000 acres in Marin County, and basically, he's resigning to go into private business and exploit the assets that he's garnered while in the Army, and he would become probably Ulysses S. Grant's greatest nemesis. Halleck would always be just ahead of him in rank, and Grant would be behind him and taking orders from Halleck. And Halleck was a glory hound and all kinds of stuff. It's a whole separate story for the Civil War. But it is coincidental that him and his great nemesis would resign on the same date. Now the Army, Grant really struggles. He struggles. He tries to become a farmer. He gets a little plot of land. He calls it Hardscrabble Farm, which describes it in its entirety. Can't make a living there. In 1858, he catches malaria. He finally goes back home, a hat in hand, and takes a job in Galena, Illinois, at the family's leather goods store. And had the war not happened, he probably would have lived out his days as a retail clerk in Galena, Illinois. But the war happens. Chicago Tribune, Wednesday, July 10th, 1861. Military Establishment of Illinois, enumeration of the 19 regiments. The following is the official enumeration of the Illinois regiments together with their present location, and they list the different regiments, 7th through 22nd, and in charge of the 21st Regiment is Ulysses S. Grant, and he's a colonel. He's been granted a colonelcy. He's not beefing and moaning about not being a brigadier general, but as is Grant's way, everything seems to break for him. And it says here on the Cleveland Leader of August 2nd, 1861, the following nomination for brigadier generals were sent into the Senate, and one of them, along with Joe Hooker, was Ulysses S. Grant. So he is a brigadier general as of August 1861. And in one of the most, Grant had a quiet determination. He's unlike any other officer that I'm familiar with in the Civil War, in that it's a dogged determination, but also backed up by an incredibly good judgment. Almost always, the good judgment and dogged determination. One of the best accounts of his personality is in what we'll have to. It's kind of a puff piece in the New York Daily Herald, November 9th, 1861. They're doing summaries of all the different generals in the Union Army, and it says here under their sketch of General Grant, he is plain. Well, General Grant is a man of plain exterior, experienced in military duties, firm and decisive in manner, and one who is esteemed highly by the soldiers under his command. He is plain and retiring in his manners and never wastes a word, and he's very laconic. He writes wonderfully sensible, explicit commands, but he doesn't waste words. So doesn't waste words with anyone, pays strict attention to his military duties. He's, without a doubt, one of the best and most accomplished officers in the West. That is who General Grant is. That is who the everyman risen to the level of supreme authority becomes. And if we were to summarize what we've seen here today, Robert E. Lee's a man of the past. He's an aristocrat in a democratic age. He was fighting to preserve a society he was fighting to preserve a society which was perhaps the worst of all possible societies. He used his talents for a bad cause, and I don't think because of his aristocratic upbringing and his immersion in that culture, I don't think he even realized there was another culture out there. Grant and Sherman, on the other hand, are modern men. They're men to whom nothing was given and everything had to be earned. Comparing to modern generals, and modern will go back 80 years, Grant is very much like Eisenhower. He realizes the productive capacity of the nation, and he harnesses that to grind the opponent to dust. And that, if you think of the war in Europe in 1944 to 1944 to 1945, you got the Red Ball Express. You've got overwhelming logistic superiority that just doesn't allow bravery. Bravery is fine, but it has no place in the modern battlefield. And Grant knew that, and Eisenhower knew that. Sherman, on the other hand, well, heck, He's patting with horses. He's all about movement. The other part of modern military. He's all about movement and action. His campaign his campaign from Chattanooga down to Atlanta is nothing more than a series of flanking maneuvers, never letting the Confederate forces get the upper hand, but constantly flanking and maneuvering, causing them to retreat back into Atlanta, where he forces them to go on the attack, to attack his defenses, and he crushes them. Modern men fighting modern wars. Robert E. Lee is a 16th century man fighting a 15th century war. The last time a fellow like Robert E. Lee, probably with his predilections, probably would have been of use, would have been perhaps in the Prussian army in World War I. But beyond that, that's the last time we're seeing aristocrats running major armed forces. And I think the United States dodged a real bullet when he chose to decline the commission, because to have to go through Reconstruction explaining who exactly Robert E. Lee was and why you put him in charge of the Union forces would have been something I don't think the nation needed to be put through. Now, we've reached the end of our show here today. It's time for our themed cocktail. And today we're going to have, in honor of Ulysses S. Grant, the Everyman, the unconditional surrender, the U.S. Grant. It's a nice, powerful, compact drink. It takes 2 ounces of smoked bourbon. Now, you can use regular bourbon, but if you really want the drink to be the drink, you got to get one of those smoking machines. They're not that expensive. Buy them on Amazon. Clip about 1/4 inch off your favorite Cohiba. Infuse the smoke through the bourbon. Then use 1 ounce of Applejack, which is of course just basically moonshine, and then 1 ounce of honey syrup, mixed 1 part water, 2 parts honey into a syrup. And because this thing has syrup in it, because it has that kind of sugar, you're gonna have to fill your container with ice, shake vigorously for 20 or 30 seconds, then strain into a chilled cocktail glass with 3 or 4 medium-sized pieces of ice in there, and garnish it with a roasted chestnut. There's nothing more North, there's nothing more Union than an unconditional surrender cocktail. Now like and subscribe, and we'll be back next week with another episode of the 100 Years and More Show. Take care, everybody.